My daughter listed my house while I was learning to walk again on a hospital railing. She didn't ask. She didn't call. A realtor took photographs of my kitchen while I was doing leg lifts in a room that smelled like antiseptic and canned peaches. And here's the part you won't see coming. The realtor she hired was a girl I taught to read Shakespeare when she was 15 years old, sitting in the back row of my third period class with a black eye she said came from a door. She recognized my kitchen before she recognized my daughter's lie. I taught American history at Kettering High for 34 years. Second floor, room 214, the one with the radiator that clanked every February like it was trying to keep time with the Cold War unit. I raised my daughter Renee in a craftsman house on Maple Street that my late husband Walt and I bought in 1987 for $18,000 we didn't fully have. I paid it off myself, in installments. The September after Walt's heart gave out, I was 51, and the bank officer looked at me like a widow shouldn't be allowed to hold a 30-year note. I held it anyway. I finished it 11 years early. On my mantel sits a brass bell. Not decorative. It's the one I rang at the front of room 214 for 3 decades to call a class back from chaos into order. When I retired, my students took up a collection and had it polished and mounted on a little walnut base with a plaque, for Mrs. Whitfield, who never raised her voice and never had to. I brought it home. It has sat on that mantel for 9 years, catching afternoon light. Renee is 41 now. Married to Trevor, a man who sells commercial insurance and drives a truck he can't quite afford. 2 kids, Caleb, 19, works weekends at a hardware store and studies engineering at the community college, and Mila, 12, who still calls me Nana Bell because of that brass bell she used to ring when she visited. I noticed things, this past year, the way a teacher notices things. Renee stopped meeting my eyes when money came up. Trevor leased a second SUV in the spring, the good kind, the kind with a screen where the mirror used to be, while telling me at Easter dinner that things are tight. I didn't push. You don't push your children. You watch, and you wait, and you keep your own books in order, because that's what 34 years in front of teenagers teaches you. Everybody's hiding something, and most of it isn't malice. It's fear wearing a nicer coat. In April, I had my right hip replaced. Bone on bone for 2 years, and I'd finally had enough of gritting my teeth on the stairs. The surgery went fine. The recovery didn't. A minor infection kept me at Willow Creek Rehabilitation Center for 6 weeks instead of 2. 6 weeks. That's the number you need to remember. Renee had medical power of attorney. 1 document. Signed 3 years earlier, at my insistence, so someone could speak to doctors if I ever couldn't speak for myself. It said nothing about my house. It said nothing about my money. It said, in plain language any first-year law student could read, medical decisions only. I want you to hold on to that sentence. Because everything that happened next was built on the hope that I wouldn't remember it, or wouldn't be strong enough to say it out loud. The idea, when it first arrived, wore a very reasonable face. Week 2 of rehab, Renee visited with a folder. Not the medical kind. A glossy one, the kind realtors hand out, with photographs of 1-story ranch homes and the words Sunrise Meadows Independent Living embossed in gold script across the front. I'm not saying today, she said, sitting on the edge of my hospital bed, patting my blanketed knee like I was one of her kids homesick from school. I'm saying we should start looking. That house has stairs, Mom. You're 68. Trevor and I worry. I told her I'd think about it. I meant it. I am not a woman who refuses to consider her own limits. I buried a husband and taught teenagers for 3 decades. I know exactly how fast a body and a room full of certainty can turn on you. Take your time, she said. No rush at all. If you've ever felt that particular chill, the one where someone tells you no rush in a voice that's already rushing, type I see it in the comments. You'll know exactly what came next. 3 days later, Caleb visited alone. 19 years old, still awkward folding himself into the vinyl visitor chair, a bag of butterscotch candies from the gift shop because he remembered I liked them. Mom and Dad are stressed about the house stuff, he said, not looking at me, The way boys do when they're about to hand you something they weren't supposed to be carrying. There was a lady taking pictures on Tuesday. Like a real estate lady. With a tripod. I set my water cup down very carefully. A lady with a tripod, I repeated. Yeah. I figured you knew. Sorry, is that not? He saw my face and stopped. Nana, is that not a thing you knew about? It was not a thing I knew about. I did not raise my voice. I asked him, gently, if he remembered her name or the company on her jacket. He didn't. 19-year-olds rarely catalog the things that matter until later, and that's not a fault in him, it's just youth, doing what youth does. But I remembered something else. A folded document, tucked in the accordion file I kept in my nightstand at home for exactly this kind of emergency, the one with my will, my insurance cards, and one single sheet titled Durable Power of Attorney, Healthcare Decisions Only. Healthcare Decisions Only. 4 words. I had made Renee read them aloud to me the day she signed it, 3 years ago at my kitchen table, so there would never be confusion later. There was confusion later. Or something that wore confusion's clothes. I asked Caleb, before he left, to do one thing for me. Not to lie to his parents. Not to spy. Just to bring me the mail that had piled up on my own kitchen counter, in a bag, next time he visited. An old woman recovering from surgery is allowed to want her own mail. He brought it Thursday. 11 envelopes and a stack of coupon flyers. I went through them the way I used to grade essays, slowly, in order, looking for the sentence that didn't belong. I found it in the 4th envelope. A letter from First Merit Savings, addressed to me, titled Mortgage Payoff Statement, requested. My house had been paid off for 9 years. There was no mortgage to pay off. Someone had called the bank, given my information, and requested a payoff quote, which only makes sense if you are preparing to sell a property and need to know what, if anything, is still owed against it. I sat with that letter longer than I've sat with almost anything since Walt's funeral. Then I found the 6th envelope. A postcard, glossy, addressed not to me but to current resident. On the front, a photograph of my own front porch, the wind chimes Walt hung in 1994 clearly visible in the frame, and the words just listed, Charming 3BR Craftsman, Maple Street. They had listed my house. Photographed it. Printed postcards. Mailed them to my own neighbors, care of current resident, because the system didn't yet have a new name to put there, only mine, which they were apparently in the process of erasing. I did not cry. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think we do each other a disservice when we pretend grief always looks like tears. Mine looked like arithmetic. I got a pen from the nurse's station and I wrote, on the back of a discharge pamphlet, every number I could piece together. Trevor's second SUV lease. $1,400 a month. Mila's private school tuition. $900 a month. A restaurant investment Trevor had mentioned once, at Christmas, that he called a sure thing. $22,000, gone quiet since March. Renee's visa statement, glimpsed once on her phone screen months ago when she set it face up beside my hospital bed. Behind. $6,100. Add it up. Add it all up, the way you'd add up a column of test scores at the end of a semester, looking for the grade nobody wants to see. They needed money. Not eventually. Now. And a paid-off, 4-bedroom craftsman on Maple Street, appraised at around $410,000, sitting mostly empty while its owner recovered from hip surgery 40 minutes away. That house was not a burden to my daughter and son-in-law. It was a solution to a problem I hadn't known they had. I called my attorney, Miriam Alvarez, a woman I'd known since she was a debate team captain I coached in 1998. I read her the 4 words on the power of attorney. I told her about the postcard, the payoff letter, the lady with the tripod. Miriam went quiet in the way lawyers go quiet right before they get very useful. Ellie, she said, do you know the name of the listing agent? I didn't. Not yet. If you've ever sat in a hospital bed or a rehab chair doing math on the people who were supposed to protect you, write I see it below, and stay with me, Because the name I found next was the last one I expected. Miriam pulled the listing the next morning. It had already been taken down from the public site. Someone had gotten nervous, or gotten a call from Caleb, who I later learned had quietly told his mother that Nana seemed upset about the house pictures. But cached pages don't disappear as fast as people hope. Miriam found the agent photo before it vanished. A young woman, maybe 30, dark hair, a confident, professional smile. Nadia Cross and Bell Realty Group. I stared at that name for a long moment before it clicked into place, and when it did, my chest did something I hadn't expected. Not anger, exactly. Something closer to vertigo. Nadia Kowalczyk. Third row, second seat, third period, class of 2011. 15 years old with a black eye, she said, came from a door, and a mother doing 18 months upstate, and a father who wasn't in the picture at all. I kept her after school twice a week for a full year, not because the district required it, but because a girl that sharp doesn't deserve to fall through a crack just because nobody's watching. I taught her to write a 5-paragraph essay on a legal pad because she didn't have a laptop at home. I wrote her college recommendation letter myself, by hand, and drove it to the post office because she didn't trust the school's mailing system to get it there on time. She got into state on a partial scholarship. She sent me a graduation announcement 4 years later with a sticky note that said, "You're the reason I didn't quit." I hadn't heard from her in maybe 6 years. And now her name was on a postcard advertising my house, care of current resident. I called the brokerage number on Thursday afternoon, using the phone at the nurse's station because my cell had died. I asked for Nadia Cross. I gave my name as Eleanor Whitfield. There was a pause on the line long enough that I thought the call had dropped. "Mrs. Whitfield?" Her voice cracked slightly on the second syllable, the way it used to when she read aloud in class and hit a word she wasn't sure of. "As in, room 214, Mrs. Whitfield?" "The same," I said. "Oh my God." A chair scraped somewhere on her end. "Oh my God, can I call you back in 10 minutes? I need to look at something." She called back in 6. "Mrs. Whitfield, I have to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth even if it's uncomfortable. Did you authorize the listing of your property on Maple Street?" "No," I said. "I did not." The silence that followed had a different texture than the first one. Colder. More careful. "Your daughter told me you'd agreed," Nadia said slowly. "She told me you were tired of the upkeep and wanted to move somewhere with less maintenance before winter. She said you'd asked her to handle it because of your recovery. She had a document, she said it was power of attorney." "It's a medical power of attorney," I said. "It says nothing about my property." "Nothing at all." Another pause. I could hear her breathing change. "I pulled photos of your house without you there," Nadia said, and her voice had gone very small, very much like the 15-year-old who used to apologize for things that were never her fault to begin with. "I mailed postcards with your address on them. Mrs. Whitfield, I am so sorry. I would never, if I had known." "You didn't know," I said. "That's not on you, Nadia. But now you do know. And I need to ask you what kind of realtor you're going to be, now that you know." There was no hesitation in her answer. "That's the part one wants you to remember about her, because it tells you everything about what kind of woman that 15-year-old became." "The listing comes down today," she said. "And Mrs. Whitfield, I think you and I need to have a conversation with your daughter. Together. Because I have a file on this transaction that she does not want you to see." I was discharged from Willow Creek 9 days later, 3 days ahead of schedule, on a Friday. I told Renee it was still the following Monday. I wanted one evening in my own house before anyone knew I was capable of standing in it. Miriam arranged a small dinner for Sunday. Renee thought it was a welcome home gathering, softened, she assumed, into an opportunity to finally get my signature on the paperwork, because in her mind, I imagine, the outcome was already settled. I was old. I was tired. I would be relieved to have the decision made for me. That is, I think, the story she needed to believe about her own mother, Because the alternative story was one where she had tried to sell a paid-off house out from under a woman who had raised her alone through some very hard years, in order to cover a leased SUV and a failed restaurant investment. I put on the blue cardigan Walt always liked. I put on my reading glasses, the ones I wore at the front of room 214 for 3 decades, the ones that mean, to anyone who ever sat in my classroom, that class is now in session. I set the brass bell on the dining table in front of my chair, where a centerpiece would normally go. Renee arrived at 6 with a casserole dish and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Trevor came in behind her, already glancing toward the window like he expected a moving truck. Caleb sat beside me without being asked. Mila asked, "Nana, why's the bell on the table?" "Because it's time for class," I told her, and she laughed, not understanding yet how true that was. At 6:15, the doorbell rang. Renee's face changed before she even saw who it was. Some animal part of her already knew. Nadia stood on my porch in a gray blazer, holding a manila folder against her chest like a shield. She looked at me for a long moment, and something in her jaw tightened with resolve I recognized. It was the same look she used to get right before she'd raise her hand in class to correct another student, gently, because she knew the answer and had finally stopped being afraid to say so. "Mom, what is she doing here?" Renee's voice had climbed half an octave. "Sit down, Renee," I said. I did not raise my voice. I never had to. I opened with the first document. "Exhibit 1, I said, and set the medical power of attorney on the table, the 4 words circled in red pen. "Healthcare decisions only. Signed 3 years ago, at this table, after you read it aloud to me yourself." "Do you remember reading it aloud, Renee?" Renee's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "Exhibit 2. I laid down the mortgage payoff letter. A request made to First Merit Savings for a payoff quote on a mortgage that has not existed since 2017. Someone called the bank using my information. It wasn't me. I was in a rehabilitation facility with a staple line in my hip." Trevor shifted in his chair. I did not look at him yet. There would be time. Exhibit 3. The postcard, glossy side up, my own porch smiling back at the table. Mailed to my neighbors. Care of current resident. As though I were already gone. The room had gone very quiet. Mila had stopped swinging her legs under the chair. "Exhibit 4, Nadia said, stepping forward and opening her folder, taking over with the calm, practiced clarity of a professional who has done nothing wrong and has stopped being afraid of the people who have. She laid out a printed text exchange. "This is a message thread between Renee Whitfield Adams and Trevor Adams, forwarded to me as part of the listing packet, apparently in error. I'll read the relevant portion." She read it in the same even voice she must have once used to read Hamlet aloud in 3rd period. "Trevor, if we net $380 after closing costs we can clear the SUV lease and put a real dent in the restaurant loan. Mom doesn't need all that space anyway. Renee, she's going to be upset at first but she'll come around once she sees Sunrise Meadows. It's actually nicer than the house tbh. Trevor, does she even need to sign off before listing goes live?" Nadia said we're fine with the POA. "Renee, I told her it covers this. She's not going to read the fine print, she trusts me." The room did not explode the way it might in a courtroom drama. It cracked, quietly, the way old plaster does. Trevor put his face in his hands. Renee said Mom in a voice I hadn't heard from her since she was 11 years old and had broken Walt's fishing rod and was trying to decide whether confessing or hiding would hurt less. "She's not going to read the fine print," I repeated, very softly. "I read fine print for 34 years, Renee. I taught children to read fine print. That was my job." Trevor tried, weakly, "Ellie, it wasn't, we were going to tell you once everything was arranged, we just didn't want you to worry during recovery." "You didn't want me conscious for the decision," I said. "There's a difference between sparing someone worry and removing their voice. I am familiar with both, because I spent 3 decades teaching the difference to 15-year-olds. Nadia closed her folder. For the record, Mrs. Whitfield, the listing has been withdrawn. No offers were made. No contracts exist. Your property remains solely in your name, exactly as it was before any of this began. She looked at Renee, not unkindly, but without flinching either. And for what it's worth, I would never have taken this listing if I'd known the truth. Mrs. Whitfield spent a year of her own time making sure I had a future. I wasn't going to be the reason someone took hers. I picked up the brass bell. I didn't ring it. I just held it, the way I used to hold it in my hand at the front of a classroom in the last 5 minutes of a period, when everyone already knows the lesson is ending and the only question left is how. Here's what happens now, I said. The house stays mine. Sunrise Meadows can keep their brochure. If either of you needs financial help because you are drowning, you come to me and you ask, out loud, honestly, like adults, and we will talk about what I can and cannot do. But you will never again make a decision about my life while I am too weak to object. That door is closed. Trevor didn't say much else that night. He left early, and for the better part of 2 months, our contact went cold, a nod at a birthday party, nothing more. I later learned, through Caleb, that the restaurant investment collapsed completely that autumn, and Trevor took a second job doing weekend estimates for a roofing company to cover what the SUV lease didn't. I didn't gloat over that. I didn't need to. Consequences rarely require an audience to do their work. Renee called me 11 days later. Not to negotiate. Not with a folder. She called crying, actually crying, the kind of crying that isn't performance because there's no one left to perform for. I told myself it was for your own good, she said. But it wasn't, was it? It was for mine. No, I said. It wasn't for your own good either. It was for your panic. Those aren't the same thing, and you knew that, which is why you didn't want me to read the fine print. She didn't argue. That surprised me more than the apology itself. Over the following months, Renee sold the second car herself, not because I asked, but because, she told me, I didn't want anything in the driveway that reminded me of that night. She picked up a part-time bookkeeping job on weekends. Small things. Real things. She started calling on Sundays just to talk, no folder in sight, and twice she brought Mila over just to sit on the porch under waltz wind chimes, no agenda attached to the visit at all. Trevor and I are civil now. Not close. I don't know that we ever will be, and I've made peace with that. Some relationships survive a betrayal changed rather than healed, and I'd rather have an honest distance than a false warmth. Nadia and I had coffee 3 weeks after that dinner. She told me she'd nearly quit real estate over the whole thing, said it made her sick to think how close she'd come to helping erase someone without knowing it. I told her the opposite lesson was the true one, she hadn't erased me. The moment she learned the truth, she stood up straighter and told it. That's not a failure. That's the entire point of everything I ever tried to teach in room 214. Her daughter starts high school next year. I've already told Nadia I'll tutor her for free, same as I did her mother, if she ever needs someone in her corner who reads the fine print for a living. I still live on Maple Street. The wind chimes are still on the porch. The brass bell went back to the mantel, catching the same afternoon light it always has, though now Mila rings it every time she visits, and I let her, because some sounds are worth keeping. I'm not angry anymore, most days. I understand fear better than most people. I spent 34 years watching it dress itself up as other things in teenagers who didn't yet have the words for what they were carrying. My daughter's fear wore the coat of a real estate listing. It could have worn a dozen other coats. The lesson underneath is the same one I taught every September to a fresh set of 15-year-olds, love your family, help them when you can, but never let someone confuse your weakness for their permission. If you've made it this far, you already know why I'm telling you this. Type I see it one more time if you've ever had to teach the people who love you that your voice doesn't retire just because your body needed rest. And if this reminded you of your own Maple Street, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.